Book TV recently visited the National Press Club's annual book fair in Washington, D.C., and spoke with author Wil Haygood about Columbus, Ohio during the Civil Rights era.
Author Wil Haygood, what is Tigerland?
It is a book about Columbus, Ohio East High School, 1968. School year starts that fall. Everybody inside the high school is very hurt, full of pain because Martin Luther King Jr. has been assassinated. Robert F. Kennedy has been assassinated. The school has its first black principal. It's a segregated school. And they want to do something special. And the school principal tells them, everybody is watching us, so we can't show anger. We can't walk out like some other high schools are doing. So first, they win the state basketball championship. And then 55 days later, this all-black school wins the state baseball championship. First time in the history of the state that the same school wins 2 championships in 1 year. The fact that they won it against the backdrop of Martin Luther King's assassination, Vietnam War protests, and other school walkouts gives it an astonishing glory angle.
How much of that was due to the principal?
Jack Gibbs, who was an amazing man, he was a walk-on football player at Ohio State University, and he was fierce, ferocious about pride. He cared about the students. They also, at the end of that year, sent more kids to college. More kids went to college from this all-black high school than in any other previous year. And, you know, it just became a national story of high achievement because of all the astonishing things that had happened. 8 of the 12 basketball players' mothers were maids. They worked as maids, 8 out of the 12. 2 of the baseball players had fathers who were serving time in prison. And so, for the most part, these were fatherless 16 and 17-year-old young black boys who did something amazing in that year that was full of pain.
Did the Columbus Dispatch report on this story?
Yes, they did, but and it was the only time that the Dispatch had as many black folk on the cover of the newspaper. I mean, they really had a sense that this was a big story, even though it wasn't a paper that that covered the civil rights movement extensively, but this was a story that they could not ignore, and they gave it play. It was the local black newspaper who had a gentleman by the name of Hiram Tanner who had played baseball in the Negro leagues, who kind of knew that the baseball team was special. And so he wanted people to pay attention. But nobody came to the baseball games, and the baseball players who I tracked down from that year told me that they would look in the stands, and sometimes there would be 1 or 2 people in the stands. Both of these teams had coaches who were white, Bob Hart for basketball and Paul Pinnell baseball. Bob Hart landed at Normandy in World War II, was a progressive, had a wonderful big heart, his last name Hart also, but he knew that this was where he wanted to be. He went to Ohio Wesleyan University right outside of Columbus, and he wrote his senior thesis on the unfair treatment of the Negro soldier in World War II. That was in 1946. And then 23 years later, he's on the sidelines leading this all-black high school to the state championship.
Why did you wait 50 years to write this story?
I I was born in Columbus, but left to work on other newspapers. And it wasn't in my consciousness that the high school had won 2 state championships. And I was home about 5 years ago after finishing my third grade Marshall book, and I ran into Garnett Davis, who was on the baseball team that year. And we were walking down the street, and we were just talking about East High in this seminal year of 1968, 1969, and that they won this wonderful basketball championship. And he said to me, he said, "But Will, I was on the baseball team. We won a state championship that year too." And I said, "No way." And he said, "No, we lost 5 games in the middle of the season. We had a 5-game losing streak, but we stormed back, made it into the state tournament, and won 8 straight games." And I said, "Are you serious?" He said, "I'm absolutely serious. We won the state baseball championship." So I ran to the library the next morning and looked it up just to make absolutely sure. And there it was. Columbus East High wins 2nd state championship in 2-month period. And I said to myself, I said, now that's a book. That's exactly what I said to myself. And I said about finding all the athletes and finding teachers and students and just threading the story together. It's 2 narratives. You know, you think of these movies like Blind Side, Friday Night Lights, and Hoosiers, and Remember the Titans. Well, those are about one sport in one school. This is about 2 sports, and they actually made it to the top of the mountain. And I think a subtext of this book is what was going on in America. Martin Luther King Jr. has a connection to this story because Reverend Phil Hale was a leading minister in the East High School area, and he had brought Dr. King to Columbus several times. And so when many of these athletes had been 7 and 8, they had watched King in 1959, 1960 lead marches up and down East Broad Street right past the high school. And so for them to have to take that blow in the summer of 68, in the spring of 68, when Martin Luther King is assassinated, many of them had seen him in the flesh. And so it was a heartbreaking moment, of course, for the nation, for the city, but on a personal level, for many, many, many people. They ate at a restaurant that was called the Novelty Food Bar, and Mrs. Beatty operated that food bar, and she was on stage with Martin Luther King Jr. when he gave his I Have a Dream speech in 1963. So it's a lot of connections to the nation, to Dr. King, leading up to this amazing moment.
Was this your high school?
No, I went to East High for 1 year, but then I finished at Franklin Heights. So I knew that it was a special place. It was segregated still 14 years after the 1954 Brown v. Board of Education. And the book actually ends with a case at the U.S. Supreme Court where the parents in the NAACP sue the city of Columbus for segregation, and they win. And so these athletes can become a part of a major lawsuit at the end of the book.
How many of the athletes were you able to track down?
Of the 12 basketball players, I tracked down 10 of them. Of the 15 baseball players, I tracked down 12. So it was amazing. Bob Hart, who was a basketball coach, had passed away, but his 3 daughters still live in the area of Columbus, and they turned over to me his World War II letters, his archives, all of his notes, all of his scouting reports on the games. Baseball, their coach, it was Paul Pinnell. He still lives in Columbus, and I was so fortunate that he was a pack rat because he had all of the scorebooks from every baseball game that year. So I really got lucky. With Paul Pinnell, too, he was the head baseball coach, but he was the assistant basketball coach. And so, in a way, I had his insight from both of the sports, and that was extremely helpful. Two of the players from the basketball team, Eddie Ratliff and Dwight Beaupete Lamar, were first-team college All-Americans in 1974. There were only 5 members of that team. And so almost half the team came from this one high school who I wrote about. 2 of the 5 were first-team college All-Americans.
The name of the book is Tigerland, a city divided, a nation torn apart, and a magical season of healing. The author is Wil Haygood. Mr. Haygood, what book of yours are you best known for?
That would be The Butler, that was turned into a motion picture that starred, among others, Oprah Winfrey, Forrest Whitaker, Cuba Gooding Jr., David Oyelowo, Jane Fonda, and Vanessa Redgrave. It was a pretty special movie, came out in 2013. I think you can safely say it sort of took America by storm. It was an amazing, heartfelt story of a gentleman who I tracked down who worked for 8 American presidents. His name was Eugene Allen, and he had quite a life. He started in the White House with Harry Truman and went all the way up to President Reagan. So he had quite an epic life.
Author Wil Haygood, thanks for your time.
Keep an eye out for more interviews from the National Press Club's book fair to air in the near future. You can also watch them and any of our other programs in their entirety at booktv.org. Type the author's name in the search bar at the top of the page.